My name's Carmela. Thank you for coming. I have a list of things to say. Early voting starts in 2 days, so vote early and vote often. We will be hosting a luncheon with Justice Daniels, who's retiring in the spring. It will be across the hall Friday, November 16th. Everyone is invited. The format of this evening is going to be each candidate will get to speak for 4 minutes on whatever they would like to say, the biography, judicial philosophy, I don't know. These crazy people, I don't know. Then each candidate will get a question, and the person running against them will get to also answer the same question. So you'll hear from everyone 3 times, and we can't open the floor to questions today, but a lot of you emailed questions in, so thank you. Questions are going to be randomly selected, like this is bingo. And lastly, I want to introduce our moderator, and that is the Honorable Judge Shannon Bacon. And you all know Judge Bacon as the second judicial presiding judge, but you might not also know, and this is a long list, she is the Commissioner for the Access to Justice. She is the chair of the Guardianship Steering Committee, which is a full-time job. She is the chair of the Pro Bono Committee, and she is the chair of many other committees that I wrote down but cannot read. So, thank you.
All right, Carmela asked me to do some welcome. So welcome everybody that's here. Welcome to anybody who's out there in TV or computer land. And most importantly, welcome to the candidates, judges, and lawyers up here on the stage. The point of today is to help educate anyone that's watching or listening today about the respective positions of the candidates, their backgrounds, so that we can be a better informed electorate. So I want to take a minute to thank the sponsors. We have the Appellate Practice Group, the Albuquerque Bar Association, the New Mexico Trial Lawyers, the New Mexico Defense Lawyers, and then the real heavy lifting done by Brianna Henley, who has pulled all of this together in terms of making sure we have video and mics and the lights are on and there's a table and that we all have somewhere to participate in this. So let's go ahead and give a round of applause to those. I'll also just briefly introduce everyone on stage. To my right, first we have Judge Stephen French, then Chris Bogardus, Judge Bonoff, Jackie Medina, Judge Keeney, Judge Brianna Zamora, Judge Daniel Gallegos, and Megan Duffy. Thank you all for agreeing to participate in this today. So with that, we'll get things started. When I spoke with Carmela yesterday, we thought we'd just kind of go down the line for the first round of questions. So my first question will be directed at Judge French. Chris Bogardus will then also have an opportunity to respond to that question as well. So we have a drum roll that I can hear in my head, and I will pick the... Oh, they're gonna do it. Oh, that's right, you're gonna do introductions first. I was getting right to the hard stuff. I'll put that one back in, Judge French. Are you drawing out of a hat there, Judge? It's a ceramic bowl. Or maybe it's plastic. It's plastic.
Judge Baker, we have to ease into this.
Oh, you're going to ease in with your introductions? Excellent.
Soften the crowd for these questions.
Then I hope that it's funny. No pressure. Judge French, go ahead.
Judge Bacon, I want to thank you on behalf, I think, of all of us, particularly us that are on the court. I realize that oftentimes you are appealed to us, and I just want you to know we always try to do right. But anyway, my name is Steve French. How are you all doing today? I've been an attorney for 38 years. I have tried to jury verdict, probably over 75 jury trials, hundreds of bench trials. I've handled over 110 appeals throughout the state of New Mexico, both in state and federal court. In 1980, I started off, I was a young prosecutor. I was the first set of prosecutors in Metropolitan Court. 2 years after that, I went down to federal court and I became a contract federal public defender. My emphasis at that time was to represent Native Americans charged with federal crimes on Indian country under the Assimilated Crime Act. I did that for about 8 years, and in 1986, I also asked our state public defender, Jackie Robbins, I requested that I defend a man charged with first-degree murder, capital offense, in the Linda Lee Daniels case. I did that in 1986. After that, I started doing plaintiff civil rights cases with people like Phil Davis and Mike Hart and Brad Hall. And what I did then was I brought claims against governmental entities in regard to suicides that were happening in our prisons. They didn't have much of an intake at that time, question or even, how are you feeling today? Are you suicidal? After that, for a long time after that, I started doing civil rights defense work. I think I've represented every law enforcement agency in the state of New Mexico, cities, counties, jails, teachers, the universities, and as I like to say, I feel I represented the people of the state of New Mexico, because that's who inhabits all of our different agencies in our government. And so that's kind of my background. I'm proud to announce that today I received the endorsement by the Taos News to keep my seat on the court, and thank you for coming.
My name is Christina Bogardus. I'm running for position 1 on the Court of Appeals. I started my law career 30 years ago this fall. I was a medical technologist and the mother of 3 young children. And I found myself divorced and concerned about how I was going to take care of my family. I needed a more flexible career, I decided, and I applied to the University of New Mexico School of Law, the best law school in the Southwest, in my opinion. Fortunately, I was accepted, and my oldest child, Nate, and I started school the same week. He started 3rd grade, and I started law school. We both had been in school for a couple of weeks, and I remember I was tucking him in bed one evening, and of course he was visiting about what had happened at school. I remember he was excited because he had had PE, which was a big deal to him, and he turned to me and he said, "Mom, how's your school going?" At that time, it was going terribly. I was so overwhelmed. I thought I had made a huge mistake. For some reason, I had focused on the uniform book of citation and was scared that I had to memorize that whole thing. So I shared with him how intimidated I felt and how difficult the classes were. And I remember his face, totally panicked at the idea that his mother had made a stupid decision and put the family at risk. And he drew himself up with his 2.5 years of school experience and said, "Mom, once you find the bathrooms, everything else is okay." Which is great advice and became my law school mantra. Before every exam, I thought, I know where the bathrooms are, I'll be fine. And not only did I locate the bathrooms at the law school, which wasn't that hard, but I located a profession and a legal community I've been so proud to be a part of for 27 years. Thanks to the education and training I received at the law school, I was able to land a clerkship with then Judge Pamela Minsner on the Court of Appeals. And that's where I started my legal practice. From Judge Minsner, I learned how judges review cases, focus on issues, work together with 2 other judges to come up with an opinion. And I learned that judges look to the law and try not to stray too far from it. After my clerkship, I started my civil practice here in Albuquerque, which I've continued to this day. I've represented people from Las Cruces to Los Alamos, from Tucumcari to Taos. I have worked as a special master, a mediator, an arbitrator, a guardian ad litem for the citizens of the state. I've been chair of the Rules of Civil Procedure Committee, a member of the Rules of Evidence Committee, and now I'm a commissioner on the New Mexico Civil Law Commission, which awards money to all the civil legal nonprofits that provide services to people around the state who can't afford them. I love my practice, but this opportunity arose, and I thought it would be fitting to return to the Court of Appeals and take my 27 years of experience and apply it to the court. I'm experienced, I'm qualified, and I'm a hard worker. But most importantly, I have a reputation for being fair, for being honest, and for respecting everyone who has been involved in litigation with me. So that's why I want to go to the court. I want to take those skills and put them to work for the citizens of the state. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Hank Bonhoff. I'm honored to be able to speak to all of you. I was born and raised in Albuquerque, and I also practiced law here for over 30 years, beginning in the early 1980s. I was with the Rohde Law Firm for the bulk of my career, but I also spent 2 years up in Santa Fe, serving with the Office of the Attorney General. During that period of time, I was a Chief Assistant Attorney General and then a Deputy Attorney General. Over the course of my 30-plus years of legal practice, I gained broad legal experience. I represented both plaintiffs and defendants. I represented individuals, including pro bono clients. I represented businesses, I represented governments. I handled a wide variety of different types of cases. I handled personal injury actions, I handled employment law cases, I handled business and real estate disputes, I handled trust cases and water law cases, among others. I litigated, I tried, and I appealed cases from all over this state. My experience includes serving as lead counsel during the remedies phase of the Pecos River litigation. It was the first Texas versus New Mexico case. This occurred in the late 80s and early 90s, and it was an original action that was in the United States Supreme Court. I also served as lead appellate counsel in the Consolidated Vista Hills retaining wall litigation, which is a long name for a case that was notable in that the New Mexico Supreme Court accepted my argument and adopted the doctrine of equitable comparative indemnification in that case. I've been recognized for my legal abilities in several by several professional organizations, including Martindale-Hubbell and Best Lawyers in America. Since my appointment to the Court of Appeals in early 2017, I have participated in deciding over 200 appeals, including over 100 criminal appeals. I've been given high marks for the readability and the clear legal analysis of the opinions that I have drafted and issued. I'm now having to run for retention of the position that I hold. I am publicly endorsed by 150 lawyers across the state. These are lawyers who cross party lines, who cross practice lines. The list can be found at my campaign website, www.keepjudgehankbonhoff.com. I now ask for your support as well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Jacqueline Medina, and I'm the Democratic nominee for position 2 on the New Mexico Court of Appeals. I was born and raised in Taos, New Mexico, and like Christina, I have 27 years of experience as an attorney, with 26 of those years here in New Mexico. I was also licensed in South Carolina. Unlike many of the other candidates that are here today, I am one who dedicated 25 years of my practice to public service. Not 2, not 5, but 25. I was also vetted and deemed qualified and recommended 2 times by the bipartisan Judicial Nominating Committee to fill the first 2 vacancies on the New Mexico Supreme Court. Let me tell you a little bit about my experience. When I first graduated from law school, I went back home to Taos, and I worked as a children's court attorney, and I also worked as a prosecutor. I stayed there for approximately 5 years. In those positions, I was able to work with probation department officials to try to find treatment programs for children who were committing delinquent acts in hopes that they would be rehabilitated and not fall into the adult criminal system. I also tried many, many cases. As a prosecutor, you're in court almost on a daily basis. I tried successfully first-degree murder cases, first-degree criminal sexual penetration cases against a minor, burglary, commercial burglaries, countless DWIs, 2 juries, and to the bench. In 2000, I was asked to join the Office of the New Mexico Attorney General's and work in the Criminal Appeals Division. And so I left Taos and began working as an appellate attorney for you. I ended up staying in the Attorney General's office for 16.5 years under Attorney General Patricia Madrid, reappointed by Gary King and Hector Balderas. I represented administrative appeals for the Department of Corrections, too many for me to count. I also handled 160 appellate cases. Many of you as appellate attorneys know that being the appellate attorney without an associate or having a brief already written means combing through the records and developing your arguments when you're writing the opening brief, and also when you're responding, crafting the legal arguments to support your position. Having briefed 160 appellate cases, I was often called in front of the Supreme Court of New Mexico and the Court of Appeals to present oral arguments as well. I appeared 16 times in front of our New Mexico Supreme Court and 10 times in front of the Court of Appeals. I was also asked to and be appointed to be on the New Mexico Supreme Court Appellate Rules Committee. I gladly accepted that appointment and served for 3 years. Recently, I was sua sponte reappointed to that committee, and I'm serving my second 3-year term. In addition to my work as an Assistant Attorney General, I have taught continuing legal education courses to attorneys. I've trained new appellate attorneys. I'm asking you today to support my candidacy for the New Mexico Court of Appeals. I have extensive appellate experience and trial experience, and I am also pleased to announce that today I too was endorsed by the Taos newspaper. I also have several other endorsements that you can see on my webpage. Thank you very much.
Time's up already.
That made it easy.
Yeah, easy. Hi, I'm Judge Emil Keeney from the Court of Appeals. My basic background is that I was born and raised in New Mexico. I grew up in Valencia County, where I still live today. After graduating from Los Lunas High School, I got my undergraduate degree at Harvard, then got a master's degree in Spain, where I lived there for 2 years, and then came back to the US and went to law school at Notre Dame. After that, I worked at a prosecutor's office for 3 years, and since then I've been in civil practice, mostly at the Madro Law Firm in Albuquerque, until my appointment to the court last year. So what I want to talk about today is why did I want to be on the Court of Appeals? Why am I trying to stay there? And why should you want to keep me there? And so I'll talk about that through the frame of my appeals experience. working on appeals are my professional passion in life because I'm a nerd, and it's a good work. It's a good job for a nerd to have if you like reading and writing and things like that. There's no better job, I think. So I didn't start out from law school thinking that that's what I would be doing. I thought I would be a trial lawyer, but after 3 months at the prosecutor's office, I was asked to go to the appeals division, or more accurately, drafted to go there, and voluntold. Anyway, but when I got there, I realized, wow, this is really what I was cut out for. And so there for the next 3 years or so, I worked on about 80 appeals. I was the lead lawyer on each of those appeals, working on mostly homicides and violent crimes. Then I decided, I met my wife in Philadelphia. That's where I went to go work at the prosecutor's office. And then when we started our family, I decided to move to a law firm. And then ultimately in 2004, we returned to New Mexico, where I worked at the Madra Law Firm until my appointment in 2017. There I eventually became a partner and head of the appeals division, and worked on a wide variety of appeals cases involving civil law, torts, administrative law, constitutional law, property law, you name it. And that's a good thing because an appellate judge has to be a generalist, and so an appellate judge needs exposure and knowledge of a wide variety of areas of the law. I've also been involved in other areas to develop my expertise in appeals. I served on the Appellate Rules Committee for 6 years here in New Mexico. Also was on the board of the Appellate Practice Section. I've taught appellate CLE classes, such as the Basic Guide to Appeals for Busy Trial Lawyers that some of you may have attended at the State Bar Convention in 2017. I also maintain my own website, the New Mexico Appellate Law Blog, where I provided expert commentary on our courts, on the appeals courts both in New Mexico and the 10th Circuit. And eventually, over the past few years, I've also consulted on with other lawyers on appeals. So even lawyers at other firms, if they had difficult points, they would contact me to discuss those, and I would try to help them out. So I would ask that the voters of New Mexico vote to keep my experience on the Court of Appeals. I thank everyone here who's helped out in organizing this session, and all the candidates here, because this is really hard work to run for office, and so I appreciate all of their efforts. Thank you very much.
Should I say good evening, good afternoon? I'm Brianna Zamora. I'm a judge, district court judge in Bernalillo County. I've been a judge now for nearly a decade. In fact, I've been in court so much that my robe has holes and it's torn, and I'm only saying that in case I get elected, maybe I'll get a new robe. As a judge, I've presided in over 20,000 cases. In my legal career, I've handled nearly 150 jury trials. The district court currently has appellate jurisdiction over on-record metropolitan court cases, and I've issued nearly 50 written decisions in those matters. That also includes, of course, the driver's license revocations from the New Mexico Taxation and Revenue Department. On any day, I have heard something as simple as a detention hearing, an evidentiary hearing that's much more complex, to post-conviction hearings that sometimes last multiple days, such as a habeas petition. We occasionally have bench trials and things of that nature. So sometimes I'm deciding things like an objection at trial within minutes. Other times it requires extensive research and writing and very long written decisions. And oftentimes as a trial judge, a lot more frequently than I would have imagined, I'm dealing with issues of first impression in New Mexico. There's just simply not any case or statute that really gives you an idea of what the correct ruling would be. So you have to survey the law as written throughout the federal system, the state system, or various other states, and kind of make a determination and provide a detailed explanation as to why you believe that's the appropriate remedy in this case. Unfortunately, not all of those go up on appeal, so we oftentimes don't get answers, but it's something I deal with very often. As a judge, I currently hear anything from a 4th-degree shoplifting case to an open count of murder. And I've had to make very tough decisions. In fact, when someone's committed a heinous crime and is convicted of that crime, I've had to make the decision to impose extremely tough sentences. And that's a lot tougher than it seems. Looking someone in the eye and telling them that they're going to spend decades in prison is not easy, but sometimes very warranted. I've also seen the positive changes in so many defendants in my courtroom who have actually made a much positive change in their life as a result of their case. Before I became a judge, I actually primarily litigated civil cases. I worked at Butt, Thornton & Bayer. I worked as an assistant attorney general in the Consumer Protection Division, and I had my own law practice. I practiced in courthouses and administrative agencies throughout the state of New Mexico. I represented both plaintiffs and defendants in civil cases. I handled areas such as workers' compensation, insurance coverage, personal injury. I also represented abused and neglected children as their guardian ad litem in children's court. The reason I'm running, and I decided to run, is because usually the final say is with the Court of Appeals. And I know as a trial judge how much I don't want the 5-year-old child abuse victim to have to come back to court and testify, or the 85-year-old elderly victim to have to come back to court and testify. Nor do I want someone wrongfully detained or put on probation and being deprived of their liberty. So I understand how much is at stake and how important it is to issue clear, concise, and consistent appellate decisions. Again, I'm Judge Brianna Zamora. I'm running for position 3 on the New Mexico Court of Appeals. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Daniel Gallegos. I am currently a judge on the State Court of Appeals. I was appointed in January of this year, and I'm running to keep my seat on the court, and that's position 4. I'm running my campaign based off of 4 phrases that I believe best encapsulate what I bring to the court. Those are experienced, trusted, fearless, and for New Mexico. I am experienced. After I graduated from Notre Dame Law School, I joined the Navy as a JAG officer, and I served for 5 years on active duty. And I've served an additional 8 years in the reserves. I've deployed 3 times, once to Iraq, once on board USS Nimitz, and once to Joint Task Force Guantanamo. I have prosecution experience, both in the Navy and here in New Mexico, where I handled crimes against children cases and domestic violence cases. I am the only person running for position 4 who has criminal law or prosecution experience. And in my more than 5 years, first as a staff attorney and now as a judge at the Court of Appeals, I've handled more than 300 civil and criminal appeals, and I've drafted more than 100 appellate opinions. I am trusted. Over the course of my career, I've been able to earn the trust of crime victims, law enforcement officers, judges, opposing counsel, and military commanders, both at sea and at war. I've been through the Bipartisan Judicial Nominating Commission process 3 times. I've been vetted, I've been deemed qualified, and recommended all 3 times. And I'm the only person running in position 4 who has gone through the Judicial Nominating Commission process. And I've been endorsed by public safety unions, including the Albuquerque Police Officers Association, the Albuquerque Area Firefighters, the Statewide Firefighters Association, and now today, the Taos News. And so I am trusted. I'm fearless. And I don't say that just because I volunteered to go to Iraq or because I stood face to face with the 9/11 terrorists in Guantanamo Bay, but I say that to capture my dedication to the principles of judicial independence and the rule of law. I am committed to making my decisions without fear or favor. The words independence and impartiality are more than words to me, and I've put those into practice both in my decision-making as a judge and in the way I've chosen to run my campaign, which is to say that I'm running a campaign that is as nonpartisan as I can have it in a partisan campaign. and I'm for New Mexico. I'm a native of Albuquerque, born and raised. I grew up in the war zone of Albuquerque. Now they call it the International District. This sounds nicer, but still the same place. I went to Hawthorne for elementary school, I went to Hayes for middle school, and I went to St. Pius for high school. My family is originally from Antonchico, New Mexico, out near Las Vegas. I have sat on the board of directors of the National Hispanic Cultural Center. The culture of New Mexico has made me the person who I am, and I believe that I bring to the court a unique perspective and understanding of the people that the court's decisions affect the most. I thank you very much for having me here today, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.
All right, last one, no pressure. I'm Megan Duffy, and I am running for position 4 on the Court of Appeals. And lately, I have been thinking a lot about what is it that we want from our judiciary? What is it that we want from our judges? And we want, more than anything else, to have fair and impartial courts that we can trust. We want our courts to consider issues fairly and impartially. These are important decisions that affect every person in our state. And so that's the importance of our third branch of government, is that we are trusting them to fairly enforce and apply the rule of law. And because of that, we respect that. And all of us sitting here are asking our candidates to serve as your judges. That's the important responsibility that we're asking you to trust us to undertake. We will be the custodians of the law in New Mexico for decades to come in the future, and you get to decide whose hands that responsibility sits in. I'm up here today because I love the law. I have loved researching the history and the evolution of our law and our democracy since I went to college. And I love our courts. These are the reasons that I went to law school in the first place, and the reasons that I'm up here now asking to be a judge on the Court of Appeals. I care about what happens to the law in our state over the long term. And when I think about how do we ensure that we have a fair and impartial judiciary in the future, you know, the way I want to do it is to be part of it. And I'm lucky enough, I got to start my law career at the Supreme Court in New Mexico. I earned a clerkship with Justice Bosson at the New Mexico Supreme Court and spent my first year out of law school up in Santa Fe doing the research and the writing that became court opinions. And while I was there, I fell in love with the work. I got to see how the court works and thinks, the collaboration that goes on, the research and the scholarship that go into forming these opinions. And I fell in love with it. I have always wanted to go back. And now, I've been in private practice for 10 years here. I'm based in Albuquerque, but I work all over the state. And so it's a unique perspective because I can look back at the cases that I worked on 10 years ago and I can see how they've been used and applied by attorneys and by courts. And that's the importance of the work that our courts are doing. And that's what you're relying on us to do, is to draft clear opinions that can be used and applied in the future. Now, I love my work in private practice. I'm part of a 2-person firm, so we each do a little bit of everything, but the writing projects usually fall on my desk. And I work with somebody that I disagree with every day. And I think that's a real asset, because when a client comes in our door, Carl always says, well, what's the right outcome? What's fair? And I always say, well, what does the law say? And somewhere in that process, we come to a better understanding of our case, and that better serves us and allows us to be advocates for our clients. And the clients are really why I love my work as an attorney. It's such a great responsibility when somebody walks into your office with a problem and they're asking for your help to solve it. You all know this because you practice every day, that it's your judgment, your experience, and your ability that helps them navigate through this process. It's a great responsibility, and no one ever told me in law school that this is what would keep me up at night and 2 in the morning on a regular basis, is the weight of this. Now, I am proud to have cultivated a reputation for honesty and independence in my career, and also impeccability in my written work, which is why when this position became available, my colleagues asked me to run. They knew I would be an excellent fit on this court. I am excited about the work, and I am asking for your support in starting on Saturday. Thank you. I'm Megan Duffy.
All right, just because we got to have some suspense here, I'll reach into the plastic bowl of questions. And these are questions that were submitted by members of the bar prior to today. None of them were written by me. I am simply the reader. So, Judge French, how do you define injustice?
Injustice. Well,
Injustice.
there's several layers and different types of injustice. I have found in my recent opinions that one of the mostly defined as of late that we've been seeing in our work is double jeopardy issues. And New Mexico has taken a position on different double jeopardy cases, be it a double description, double jeopardy, or a unit of prosecution double jeopardy case, and applying the Blockberger standard. And then Justice Daniels, and I believe it was the Montoya case, said then we look further past the Blockberger standard to substantially similar acts. And so that's a very technical answer, and that's my answer.
Ms. Bogardus.
Thank you. I agree with what Judge French said, that inconsistency in the law is a problem. But I think what we really have to grapple with in this state and also in this country is unequal access to the law to even start. Our campaign, and I know Judge French has done this as well, we travel all around the state. It has been so educational to me to leave my little cocoon in Albuquerque and go out and meet people and talk to them about exactly what their concerns are with the legal community. And it's not me talking, mostly it's just me listening. And to listen to the small problems that people start with, but because they have no legal representation, snowball into huge problems. That is just so frustrating to me. So I think injustice really starts with unequal access to the courts and prevents a significant segment of our society from enjoying the benefits of a judicial system that we've developed for over 300 years that is elegant and protects us, but we have to make sure people can have access to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Judge Bonhoff, tell us something you've done in the last year that has nothing to do with politics that would give New Mexicans insight to who you are as a person. I like that question.
I have to confess, first of all, that over the past year I have done little except campaign and serve on the court. I share Judge Gallegos' principle and value that politics needs to be kept out of the courtroom. And that is certainly how I have approached my job. So I guess the answer to the question is being a judge is what I have done that hasn't involved politics. I have multiple times had to make decisions on cases that have been assigned to me that require divorcing oneself from political considerations, from political controversy, and instead simply looking at the law, looking at the body of facts, and sometimes having to make tough decisions that I expect will generate controversy and criticism. But that's the job of a judge. I think we all know that, those of us who are in this room, who've taken the oath of office. Our oath is to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of New Mexico and the Constitution of the United States. And sometimes that requires us to make decisions that we know are going to be controversial. They sometimes require us to make decisions that we wouldn't necessarily agree with, but it's the decision that's required by the law. And so that's my answer is what I've done over the past year that hasn't had anything to do with politics is carry out my oath of office.
Ms. Medina, same question.
Well, I just love that question. I immediately thought about something I did, about a month ago. Maybe it's already been 2 months because I've been campaigning for about 1.5 years and also doing my contract work and trying to raise my 15-year-old daughter. I've been extremely busy, but I also became very exhausted. And growing up in Taos, I grew up with an appreciation of the outdoors. I was able to go fishing with my father, hiking, cleaning the ditches. I was used to being outside, and when I finally hit my peak stress level in this campaign, I realized I needed to go outdoors, but I also knew that my daughter needed my attention. And so I asked my husband to take a road trip, and we drove to Arizona, and we hired a backhauler to take us 15 miles up the Colorado River and drop us off with our paddleboard and kayaks. And we floated back down the river. It was beautiful. It cleansed the mind. It's how I used to relax and refocus when I was a prosecutor. As you can imagine, I used to handle many, many heinous cases. And at times, I was asked to handle cases where there was extreme public outcry, hoping or wishing that the Office of the District Attorney would perhaps not apply the law. But that was not my role, and I developed quite a fortitude for applying the law and following my duty. In one case, there was an extradition case, and there was public outcry. They did not want the individual extradited back to Ohio. And when I handled that case, I had researched the law, and I encouraged the district court that this is a very limited type of hearing. Your scope of inquiry is very limited because the merits of the alleged probation and parole violation actually have to take place in Ohio. In that case, the district court judge did not adhere to my belief that the hearing was going astray, and she released the accused. And then the New Mexico Supreme Court agreed. And I thought to myself, and so the public was very happy with that outcome, but I thought to myself, there's a reason we have to follow established precedent. And I asked the Attorney General's office if they would pursue the case to the New Mexico Supreme Court, and they did. And the New Mexico Supreme Court, in a per curiam decision, reversed because the correct procedure had not been followed in New Mexico. And when that case came down, that opinion, I was actually living in South Carolina and I received the call. But that was definitely one of the cases where I had to decompress, and I did so by going outdoors. So my answer is, what have I done in the last year that is different? It was paying attention to my daughter, my family, and appreciating the great outdoors.
All right. Judge Keeney, how will you work to ensure equality for people of all backgrounds in your court?
Did you say equality?
Equality. Equality for all people, all backgrounds in your court.
Okay, thank you. What I've done over the past year and what I would expect and intend to continue doing is, first of all, to make sure that like cases are treated alike. And one way we do that is to follow precedent. And in doing so, we ensure that we don't reach one result in one case with similar facts to another case, because that would lead to inconsistency. It would lead to a undermining of confidence in the courts. And public confidence in the courts is really the source of our strength. It's the reason why people respect our judgments. We can't send out police to arrest people who won't carry out our judgments. That's the job of the executive branch. So for people respect and follow our judgments, they have to expect that we are applying them equally to different people. The other thing that we need to do is remind ourselves that a lot of what I would expect to do is, and I'm very mindful of this, is a lot of the parties who come before our courts are not the most popular people. People don't end up in court usually because they're doing the right thing or feeding the poor or whatever. They've either been accused of doing wrong things or actually have done wrong things or have done immoral things. And so what I would expect to do and intend to do as a judge is to apply the principles and our precedents and statutes to those people regardless of what the outcome is, and even if it leads to unpopular outcomes. So, thank you very much.
Judge Zamora.
Okay. I'm going to continue to do what I've been doing for nearly a decade, and that's irrespective of someone's race, gender, what language they speak, where they come from, who they choose to marry, no matter their immigration status. If they've entered my courtroom, I've treated them with dignity, respect, and fairness. And I believe that's why I was recommended by a bipartisan commission when I was appointed as a trial judge in 2008. I believe that's why I was recommended by a bipartisan commission for the New Mexico Court of Appeals. I believe that's why I was elected and retained as a district court judge. And I believe that's why my excusal rate is so very low.
Hope all your opinions are going to be this brief.
Depends in part on the appellate lawyers.
Right. All right, so I think this is one of the more difficult questions. So, just to let you know. Can you explain your judicial philosophy in plain English?
Plain English. All right. My judicial philosophy in plain English is to get it right. I mean, we are, as the New Mexico Court of Appeals, we're an intermediate appellate court. We are an error-correcting court. That's our job. Someone below believes that the trial court made an error. Our job is to decide whether or not they did make an error, and if they did, what do we do about that? Was it a harmless error that we say, you know what, no harm, no foul? Or is it so harmful that we have to send the case back? When we do that job, we're very constrained. And my colleague here, Judge Kinney, kind of referred to that. It depends a lot on other people in the system besides us. You know, there are the arguments that are made in the district court, in the trial court, preservation issues. How is the issue raised? What is the decision of the district court judge? Are we talking about an issue of fact, or are we just dealing with an issue of law in terms of the kind of deference that we give to those rulings? So we have our own standards of review that we apply when we get a case in front of us, and we're bound not only by the arguments that are made below, but also the arguments that are made on appeal by the lawyers. And so for the most part, our job is relatively constrained. And so on those vast majority of, I don't want to call them run-of-the-mill cases, because every case affects the person who is dealing with that case, but there are your vast majority of cases that come through the Court of Appeals are cases in which we are going to apply the law to the facts, we're going to apply our standard of review, and we're going to make a decision. Sometimes that will take doing statutory interpretation. in which case my philosophy is to read the words that are written in the statute and to apply them as best I can. We are held in this country to a presumption that you know the law. We always say ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, the reason why we have that is because we have written laws, and we expect that people know what's in those books, even if that is a bit of a legal fiction. However, I do not expect or presume that someone knows what law is sitting in my head and what I am going to say that the law is. And that's why when I interpret a statute, I go by the words and the plain meaning of those words, because that's what we're holding the people of the state accountable to. That's what they're held to have knowledge of. And so by interpreting statutes, by applying our standards of review, by applying the law as it is to the facts of the case, our job is to decide, was there an error, and if there was, what do we do about it? That's the job of the Court of Appeals. That's my judicial philosophy, is to get it right, and if I don't get it right, we have a Supreme Court that'll tell me I didn't.
Ms. Duffy.
Thank you. I don't think that it's altogether different than what you do every day as an attorney. And that is, you have to understand what the law is before you can apply it. And so obviously you want to get it right. I don't think anyone would sit up here and say, I want to get it wrong. But what does that mean, and how do you look at it? So, you know, when we review, when we have a Supreme Court candidate and everybody wants to know, what is your judicial philosophy? You're expecting to hear words like originalist or strict constructionist, and there's room for all of these philosophies in interpretation of the law, but really where it starts is, what does the law say? And that can be as simple as, what does the statute say? But often it's not, and we know this as practitioners, that there is a lot of gray area in our everyday work. There are issues that come up that have never come up before. There are new laws that our legislature adopts that have not been applied before. And so what do we do in those situations, which are often the ones that find their way through the trial court and up to our appellate courts? Certainly we start with, what does the written record of law say in New Mexico? If it's a statute, we read the statute. If there is case law that's on point on the issue, we start there. And if that decides the issue, that's as far as we need to go. But if that doesn't provide clear guidance on how a case should come out, then we have to go a little farther. We have to look at interpretation of similar laws. What did the legislature intend when they were contemplating passing this law? What did they think about and discuss? What have other states done? What is the philosophy and the policy of our state as it applies to this area of the law? So it's a little more complex, and it's not quite as simple as what does the law say, but you need a mind that's going to consider an issue from all of these perspectives and collaborate with your colleagues to try to figure it out. So that's my philosophy, is to read and research as much as possible so that I have the best understanding that I can of not only what the law says, but how it impacts people, both practitioners and courts, because that's what we're doing, is we have to provide guidance on this issue for everyone in the future. And in order to do that, that's where a background of actual practice and representing clients comes into play, because you understand how these little nuances in the law can come up and how many ambiguities there are every day when you practice, and what you need from courts in order to provide that guidance, because that's how you inform your clients down the road. So that's my judicial philosophy in a nutshell, and hopefully with that framework, we'll get it right. Thank you.
All right, now we'll start with the non-incumbent candidate going first to answer the question and the incumbent speaking second. So, Ms. Bogardus, what is the biggest issue facing the judiciary in New Mexico, and how can the Court of Appeals address it?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. And I think from my observation, the biggest issue facing the judiciary in New Mexico is lack of resources. We have seen year after year that the judiciary is not funded to its full potential. Services have been cut back in many jurisdictions, and that just is something that snowballs. People have expressed tremendous concern to me about crime in Albuquerque. Everyone is talking about it. And once you discuss with people and explain that the judicial system operates basically like a tripod, and if you want justice in your community, if you want a legal system that works, you have to have sufficient funds, that you have prosecutors, that you have public defenders, and you have enough judges and resources for the courts to provide the services that the citizens need. The Court of Appeals has its own unique set of problems. I remember when I was a law clerk and that was, 27 years ago, I did research for an article on the history of the court for Judge Bivens and I think it was Judge Donnelly and Judge Minsner, who wrote a law review article about it. And starting at that time, I mean, the court was first created to help with a backload of cases from the Supreme Court. It was expanded multiple times to deal with backlogs as the Court of Appeals jurisdiction expanded. And again, that seems to be a problem that the court is facing today. It is a very busy court. I think there are 900 to 1,000 cases filed each year. And it requires, and there are litigants at the district court level and defendants who are waiting to find out what is going to be the result from the court. So it's always been a court that's been under pressure because it has so much work to do. And I think the Court of Appeals has taken some steps recently to address the problems that it has. I think it's trying to do some modernization type things and streamlining the way cases are assigned, and I think those are improvements. I know there's been some readjustment of resources, and those are also good ideas. I will say that because of my start in law school, I had to learn how to be incredibly focused and efficient, because my law school day ended at 4 o'clock when I came home, and I didn't do anything until all of the kids were in bed. So that is something that I've done throughout my career, and I want to take those skills to the court and help deal with the backload that it has.
Well, I think just like I've been saying since 1986 that we need to get all the politics out of the judicial races, crime is not a partisan issue either. And I think that we have seen a great increase in crime no matter where I go around the state, like Ms. Bogardus was just talking about.
You can say Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
We're friends now.
No matter where we go around the state, I think everybody talks to us about crime. What are you going to do about crime? What are you going to do about this? They always ask us, what are you going to do about catch and release? What are you going to do about that? And sitting on the court and we hear all the 12204s, we can't talk about that. But one of the things that I see, it's really a funding, it's really type of a funding issue. In my career, if you go back all the way to 1986, I was the head of the public defender transition team for the Carruthers administration. And what we were trying to do is we were trying to get more money for the public defender department. If you're going to try to enforce the death penalty, and thank goodness we don't have a death penalty in New Mexico anymore. If you're going to enforce the death penalty, you have to have funding for the attorneys, for the public defender's office to do their job, to represent them. Because when those cases come before our court, and certainly the Supreme Court, or even the Supreme Court of the United States, the fact is we are going to look at ineffective assistance of counsel cases. Now, of these criminal cases that we see, I mean, we have so much of our staff here right now, they're even more experienced in this than I am. And they can talk to you about, we've seen an increase of ineffective assistance of counsel cases. And I think what that is a reflection in no small part to funding for the public defender's office, for funding for the prosecutor's office. And so it just kind of snowballs. And hopefully we have taken steps in the last 2 years internally within our court to reorganize our court a little bit and try to streamline the way that we are doing business, such as having a paralegal review my decision, then Hank's participation, and then Dan's participation, or Emil, or any combination thereof. Let's do mine, Julie, and Judge Hennessy, Judge Vargas back here. And so we're trying to streamline this. But with the criminal, with crime on the rise, there's a lot of socioeconomic issues involved with that. But I think that we're going to have to work through it, and we're going to have to work through it as a state, as a people, together. By the way, Julie Vargas always edits my opinions.
I think that's her job. All right, next up, Ms. Medina. What is your background in criminal law practice, and what do you expect the Court of Appeals caseload to be in criminal cases?
Well, I looked at the stats from the last year, and yes, approximately of the 900 or so cases that were filed in the Court of Appeals within the last year, it's no surprise to me that 40% of those cases were criminal appeals. Another 6% came from children's court. Out of those 6% of children's court cases, some of those came from the delinquency side of children's court, which means that they arose out of the criminal code, because delinquency cases are delinquent acts that are actually offenses found in the criminal code, but you call it delinquent acts. But what's my background in criminal law? It's quite extensive. It's probably the most extensive of any of the candidates here today. I spent 7.5 years as an assistant district attorney and a children's court attorney in delinquency cases. I've handled many, I presented as lead counsel many criminal cases to juries and to the bench. And then I spent 16.5 years, I handled quasi-civil criminal administrative appeals for the Department of Corrections, and I also handled criminal appeals. Those are cases that come from all over the state of New Mexico, where either the accused who's been convicted or the state prosecutor who has seen evidence suppressed has filed an appeal claiming perhaps the judge interpreted the statute wrong and erroneously suppressed the evidence, or a defendant appealing the sufficiency of his of the evidence regarding the criminal conviction, or perhaps the denial of his constitutional rights, or a claim that he received ineffective assistance of counsel. Through 16.5 years, I too saw an increase of claims of ineffective assistance of counsel, and I have to say that I felt it was also in large part to the unfortunate position our state is in economically. When there's insufficient funds to support the public defender's office and even the prosecutor's office, the turnover is high. And so institutional knowledge of young attorneys coming out affects their representation of those who are accused. And then what happens is they leave the office, and so there's no one to act as a mentor. This also happens in the prosecutor's office. On top of that, with the rise of crime, the caseload increases. And so it's a very difficult process. So I just wanted to acknowledge that I did see an increase in ineffective assistance of counsel claims. It's very important to have judges on the Court of Appeals with extensive criminal law background. In fact, I was asked by attorneys from the Public Defender's Office and from the Attorney General's Office to consider running for the Court of Appeals, because when a decision is rendered in the Court of Appeals and one of the parties has to ask the Supreme Court to grant certiorari review to get it right, Who is the victim? There's many. It's the victim of the criminal case, their family, the accused, his or her family, and the court system, because if it's a published opinion, the courts all across New Mexico are required to follow that precedent until it's possibly reversed. But my experience in criminal law, 26 years. Thank you.
Judge Bono, same question.
Judge Bacon, could you repeat the question again? There were two parts to it. I didn't get the second part.
What is your background in criminal law practice, and what do you expect the Court of Appeals caseload of criminal appeals to be?
My background prior to coming onto the court in criminal law was minimal. I had some experience with it when I clerked for Judge Bratton my first year out of law school, but that was it. I asked other judges when I was applying for the position whether that would be a hindrance, and uniformly I was told that it's much easier to be a lawyer who has had civil law experience and comes on to a court and learn criminal law once you come onto the court, as opposed to being a lawyer with criminal law background and come onto a court and have to learn civil law. I found that to be the case. We do have roughly 40% of our docket is criminal law on the Court of Appeals. A small portion of the children's court cases are juvenile delinquency cases, but really the lion's share of our children's court cases are termination of parental rights cases. The criminal law cases that we have are really fairly repetitive. We have lots of DWI cases, and the issues that come up are recurring. Criminal law, I've found, is a fairly narrow area. If you look at it from the standpoint of the New Mexico statutes, we have 16 volumes of New Mexico statutes. The criminal laws comprise approximately 1 volume out of the 16. What I've found is over the first year or so of my service on the court, I was able to get up to speed on the criminal law matters with some exceptions. Criminal law is fairly straightforward. And I think I've gotten up to speed on that, and I can handle the criminal law cases that the court hears. I'm convinced that my civil law background is really the background that I need in order to serve the court well, because those are the difficult cases that we have to handle, are the civil law cases.
The bowl is getting emptier. Seeing how many, this is kind of a repeat question. So. No, don't worry.
Remember, these came from across the bar, so some of them are repetitive.
So I was trying not to get one that what sounded like one that has already been answered. Okay. So Judge Zamora, what qualifies you to be a judge beyond your law degree?
What qualifies me to be a judge beyond my law degree? Well, most importantly, my almost decade of judicial experience, I would think, qualifies me to be a judge beyond my law degree. The fact that I have practiced both civil and criminal and children's court, which means my experience is well-rounded. I think that the fact that I've been vetted both for a position as a trial court judge and vetted as well and recommended for the New Mexico Court of Appeals would make me qualified to be a Court of Appeals judge. But I think When you've done it for as long as I've done it, your reputation speaks for itself, and I think I have a reputation for being fair, for impartial, being prepared, and applying the law equally and fairly and consistently to the litigants that come before me. It's kind of a weird question since I've been a judge so long, but there's my answer.
Thank you. Judge Keeney.
Well, that's a good question, because a lot of non-lawyers don't realize this, but once you had a law degree and you go into court, you still don't really know anything. So it's got, okay, all right, okay, it's secret, forget you heard that. Anyway, well, I would refer to my appeals experience. I'm the only candidate for my position whose career has been dedicated to appeals and working in this area of the law. And I would also point out that working on appeals doesn't mean just, I think some people have a view of appellate lawyers as, sitting up in the top tower of a monastery on a remote island all by yourself with a, in a library where you just work away.
I thought that's what it was.
No, some of the time, okay, but a lot of the time, you're dealing with clients, you're hearing about their concerns, you're learning about different areas of the law. Every case requires you to learn. So, and even on the court, every case requires me to learn something. And so I've learned how to do that quickly and efficiently. The other thing you do as an appellate lawyer is a lot of your work is actually in the district courts, because nothing more frustrating than getting a great appeal, a really neat, interesting case that comes up, and you find that issues haven't been preserved. So if you can work in the trial court to help, I would often help my colleagues preserve issues by writing motions and arguing those motions in front of trial judges and attending trials and helping just make sure everything that we needed to get done got done. So I'm used to working in this arena. I've taught other lawyers how to handle appeals, and so that's my answer.
All right, Ms. Duffy, what reforms do you support to increase access to justice for all, and will you fight for them?
Ooh. It's an interesting question, because asking to be a judge, you are hanging up your advocate hat and going to a more neutral role in life. But access to justice is such a big issue in our state. I remember sitting in a legal aid CLE 2 years ago, and they were talking about just the need for attorneys to practice in faraway removed counties in our state. That the bulk of the attorneys were practicing in Albuquerque, but we have these outlying counties where we don't even have a single attorney living and practicing, particularly in the northeast corner of our state. So how do we spread out access to justice in terms of having an attorney or having access to an attorney to represent you? And I think Legal Aid has done some tremendous things. And Equal Access to Justice has done some tremendous things with their call-in process and their farming out to attorneys locally, just to provide advice and consultation and see if there's a way to help somebody navigate their legal issue on their own. Unfortunately, the reality of our legal system is that it's very difficult to navigate most areas of the law without an attorney these days. There are some, like probate and sometimes your domestic issues, that you can do without an attorney, but the vast majority of cases that come up, advice and counsel are critical. So solving that is critical. And just additional funding for legal resources. Legal Aid and Equal Access to Justice are doing a good job, but obviously we could do more with more resources. We could do more with more resources for our courts. Our state public defender and district attorney's offices are underfunded. And so funding is a big issue that impacts people all over our state, and certainly to the extent that I am able as a member of the Court of Appeals, when the legislative session comes around and it's time to talk about budget, anything I can do to help with that, I certainly would, because that's important. That impacts all of us in terms of not only getting to court, but how timely your decisions are coming out, whether you're represented in the process, whether we have enough judges to handle the immense caseloads that are thrust upon them, particularly in Bernalillo and Santa Fe. Certainly, I will advocate to the extent possible, because access to justice is equality and it's fairness in our state, and we need to aspire to achieve that to the greatest extent possible. In addition, you know, some of the things that I'm most proud of in my career are the pro bono cases that I've worked on. And without going into detail, I have one right now that I've been working on for about 4 years that's finally coming to resolution here pretty quickly. But that's not a case that would have been possible had my young disabled client not had the legal aid network available to her through the state bar to pair her up with an attorney that would take her case. So all of these things working together make a difference, and I think the answer is we just need more of them. We need more resources. And so my job will be to listen, to see where we can help, how we can help, and to the extent that I am able, to help make that possible. So, yes.
Judge Gallegos.
All right, I think she answered it right. I mean, we need resources. We need things for legal aid. Access to justice is a very important issue, and it's something that I experienced on my own, not necessarily from access to justice standpoint, but when I was graduating from Notre Dame the first time from my undergrad, I tore my ACL when I was out in South Bend playing a basketball game. And long story short, I had a dispute with the insurance company. They refused to pay for my ACL surgery, and the doctor said that I needed it. And so I went with the doctor's advice. I had the surgery, and I instantly had about a $25,000 bill hanging over my head. I had come back. I had just graduated from college, and I decided I was going to fight the insurance company. But, you know, as I said before, I didn't grow up in an affluent family. I grew up in a family where my dad had a high school diploma, my mom has her GED. And we didn't think about lawyers. We didn't think about any of that. And so I decided to take on the insurance company on my own. And so I filed, you know, everything that I needed to file. I got denied again, took the insurance company before the State Board of Insurance, argued against the insurance company's lawyers, and I won. And I got rid of a $25,000 debt. And one of the board members, when he came up to me after the hearing, he said, "You need to promise me one thing, and that is when you finish your master's degree, you have to go to law school." And at that moment, I knew two things. One was that maybe I'd be a pretty good lawyer, and number two, the power of the law and what it does in people's lives. Access to justice is an important thing. I understand that completely. I understand what the law does for people and how people can be put in bad positions by the law. You know, and it's funny because I come from that position, because I don't know how many of you have seen my opponent's commercial in the last couple days. I mean, I'm kind of cast as a bully, kind of cast as you know, an unfair, unethical Republican. And I don't know if anything can be further from the truth in terms of the way I've lived my life, the things that I've done, and the way I've approached the practice of law, and now the way I've practiced and approached my job as a judge on the Court of Appeals. And so I understand the impact that the law has, and I will continue every day to work hard for the people of New Mexico and to make sure that the right outcome happens in every case. Thank you.
All right, I think the candidates are all off the hot seat now. Thank you all so much for agreeing to participate in this process. I think this is the biggest candidate forum that's probably ever happened in a judicial race in the state of New Mexico.
Us or them?
You. We all got to pleasantly listen to your answers, your eloquent answers to some tough questions, and hopefully it will help people who still need to make determinations about who they want to vote for. And I'll simply remind everyone to go out and vote and exercise your voice. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.